The Nike Vaporfly 3 and the Nike Pegasus Plus, two shoes that don't seem like they have a lot in common, but they can both fill very similar roles in an all Nike rotation. As I said in the intro, these two shoes don't seem like they have a lot in common, but as someone who's raced and trained mostly in full Nike rotations for the past 6 or 7 years, I'm going to say that these two shoes share a very similar spot in how I would build an all Nike rotation for training and racing pretty much any road racing distance. And starting with the specs, I'm going to say that there's 3 primary differences that really matter between these two shoes. The first one is that the Vaporfly 3 has a carbon fiber plate, while the Pegasus Plus has nothing. It's pure ZoomX. There's no plate, there's no shank, there's no carrier foam. It is just 100% ZoomX. Because the Vaporfly 3 has a carbon fiber plate, which you can see here, the plate sits very close to the heel in this shoe. Now, ZoomX is a foam that you sink into, but because of the plate and especially its location in the heel, I'm also going to say that the drop in the Vaporfly 3 feels like an 8mm drop. You feel that drop from the heel. Whereas in the Pegasus Plus, since there's no plate or shank, the real feel of the drop is probably 6 to 8. It could be even less depending on how you strike the ground. The second key difference here is really the foam. Now, both of these shoes are full ZoomX foam. However, the ZoomX foam formula that's in the Vaporfly 3 is that original airy, very resilient foam that we've really been familiar with since the original Vaporfly 4%. While the foam that's in the Pegasus Plus is the newer, more rubberized, slightly more durable ZoomX foam, but you still get a very ZoomX feel in both of these shoes. The third and final key difference between these two shoes is really the weight. The Vaporfly 3 is an incredibly lightweight race shoe, whereas the Pegasus Plus is a fairly lightweight trainer. And that's really the difference. You feel that the Vaporfly 3 is one of the lightest race shoes or super shoes that you can buy, and the Pegasus Plus is right about where it should be for a trainer of its category. Beyond those 3 key differences, I'm going to say the ride of these two shoes are very familiar. They actually have quite a lot to do with one another. Now, as I said, they're both full ZoomX foam. They're slightly different formulas, but in both of these shoes, you get that very familiar ZoomX sink, meaning there's a lot of compliance or deformation to the foam. Your foot sinks into both of these. I'm going to say because the ZoomX foam in the Vaporfly 3 is a little bit more airy, a little bit more performance oriented, I do feel a little bit more sink in that shoe than I do over the Pegasus Plus. But both of these have very extreme ZoomX rebound and resiliency, meaning the energy return when you unweight the shoe is very, very high. And both these shoes share that. But the real difference between these two shoes is obviously the carbon fiber plate in the Vaporfly 3. And I'm going to say the combination of ZoomX and the carbon fiber plate makes the Vaporfly 3 very propelling. That is a signature Vaporfly 3 feel. Whereas the Pegasus Plus is just very resilient. You're getting a good amount of sink and you're getting all of that energy return of the foam, and that's really the basis of the ride. Moving to the outsole and the contact patch of these two shoes, this is where you can really see some key differences, not only in the shape, but also the width. The Vaporfly 3 is a very narrow, very nimble, very agile super shoe. It is a race shoe, where the Pegasus Plus is a wider, much more stable trainer. And that's one of the key differences between these two shoes. And looking at the rubber coverage on these two shoes, this is where you can really see a big difference. The Pegasus Plus is quite obviously a trainer, where the Vaporfly 3 is quite obviously a racer, and it's a racer with a forefoot bias. But as a forefoot striker, I'm going to say the piece of rubber on the forefoot of the Vaporfly 3 is one of the best outsoles that I've experienced in maybe 10 years on a Nike shoe or really any other shoe. It has a lot of grip, it is actually very durable, and you get a lot of feedback to the ground because of the cutouts in this outsole. It just works really well. Now, on the Pegasus Plus, as I've commented a bunch of times now about this shoe, the outsole works just fine. I just think it could have been much better. I would have loved to see a forefoot piece of rubber on the Pegasus Plus similar to what's on the Vaporfly 3, and then they could have stripped down the heel a little bit more what's on the Pegasus Plus just to give it more durability, done something else in the midfoot. There's a lot of room for improvement on the Pegasus Plus, but it does the job. It works just fine. Now moving to the fit and feel on foot of these two shoes and starting with the Vaporfly 3, this is where this comparison isn't really quite fair. The Vaporfly 3, as I've said, is a race shoe. This is a race upper on this shoe. Now, this upper has been absolutely outstanding for me, but I think I'm a bit lucky with this because I know not everyone loves this upper the way I do. But I'm a runner who has neither wide nor narrow of a foot, but I do have a high and developed arch and a very high volume foot. Additionally, I have very sensitive toes, especially my big toe and big toenail, to just being cramped and not having a good fit in a race upper. And I can say that this upper has given me absolutely no problems, and I've run this shoe really on everything. Every training scenario, every race scenario. I've even run this shoe off-road a little bit, and I've never had an issue with this upper. Now, from a fit standpoint, it is a race fit, but it's not the most constraining fit. There's actually a lot of volume across the forefoot in this shoe. You don't have a lot of wiggle room in here. It is still a Vaporfly fit, but there is a little bit more volume in here, and I think that's one of the things that's really helped my foot, especially my toes, not have any issues in this shoe. Like I said, it's a Vaporfly. The tongue is always something to get in place, and the heel counter in this shoe is actually fairly rigid. It's got a piece of padding back here that wraps around and over the Achilles, pocket back there. Given that this is a carbon-plated shoe, but it is still fairly flexible for a carbon-plated shoe, heel lockdown, midfoot lockdown, forefoot feel, it's been absolutely exceptional in this shoe for me, and I've had no problems whatsoever. And moving to the Pegasus Plus, this is a training upper. It is much more generous, it's much more forgiving in its fit, and it's a fly knit upper. So the heel of this shoe and the heel counter is a standard Pegasus heel and counter, meaning there's a big deep pocket here, and the Achilles flare is very accommodating to a lot of different Achilles. Great heel lockdown in this shoe. Midfoot, forefoot, this is a fly knit upper. This is that older style fly knit that really conforms to the foot. It's that soft, stretchier fabric that stretches and wraps around the foot. It's actually really, really great. The midfoot lockdown in this shoe is excellent. The forefoot in this shoe is not the widest shoe, but again, because the fly knit upper material is so conforming to the foot, it doesn't ever feel really constricting. The only thing that's a little odd about this shoe is it is a little pointy in the way the last is built. So there is a little bit more room in the front of the shoe. But for both of these shoes, I'm going true to size. These are both US men's size 9 for me. So I actually went the same size in both of them, and the fit is ideal in both of them for me. Now, to break this down and really explain why these two shoes have such a relationship to me, especially in an all Nike running shoe rotation aimed at road racing, let me break it down in 3 ways. The first way is with my performance matrix. Now, these are 4 types of running that I would expect mostly training shoes to cover, though race shoes fit on the left end of this matrix. And if we put the Pegasus Plus on here, which I've shown before in other videos, it really covers from easy all the way into max effort. Now, since I originally showed this, I have tweaked this a little bit based on some more recent runs, meaning I've moved that orange or red area, the sweet spot of the shoe, a little bit more in the threshold category, because I'm finding the more effort and the faster that I'm running in the Peg Plus, the better it's performing. And if we put the Vaporfly 3 on here, this obviously being a race shoe is going to do threshold and max effort work really well, and it really is happiest doing that really max effort type of work. Again, it's a race shoe, but as you can see, there is quite a bit of overlap in here, especially on the left-hand side of this, that faster running. And I think that's the first place to really look at how these two shoes have a ton of overlap. The second way of looking at how these shoes actually overlap quite a bit is via data. So instead of me telling you how I think the shoe feels, let's actually look at some data from recent workouts in both of these shoes. Now, this data comes from a much larger data set that I've been working on. It comes out of a workout that I've developed to test super shoes. And that's going to be a larger video that will be coming out in the next week or 2. So if you want to see that video, subscribe, you'll see that pop up in your feed. But this data, I think, is really relevant to, again, tell the story about where there is a lot of overlap in this shoe. So I pulled out these 2 reps in this larger workout. The first is a 2K at marathon pace for me. So that's 4:14 per kilometer or 6:49 per mile. And as you can see between these 2 shoes, there isn't a big difference. Now, you can see the weather conditions below there. There was a little bit more wind in the workout that I did with the Pegasus Plus, but fundamentally between these 2 shoes, there's not a big difference. Now, 2K of marathon pace is really nothing, But in a training scenario, doing a 2K rep at marathon pace is something that I would often be doing, especially early to mid in the marathon build. You may be doing 4 or 5 2K reps at marathon pace over a longer workout, but being able to do 2K or 3K, even 4K at marathon pace, I think is really quite nice. And the fact that there isn't a huge difference between these two shoes, to me, is quite remarkable. Now, I will say that if I was going to do a rep over, say, 4 or 5K, I do think I would benefit from the carbon fiber plate in the Vaporfly 3. But for this shorter type work, there really isn't any difference. And in fact, the note I had around both of these reps was that the Vaporfly 3 felt steadier. And I made a note that towards the end of it, maybe the last 400 meters, I could really feel the plate working for me. And I actually could see in the data that my stride extended a little bit. So I would expect that from a carbon plated shoe. But I had a note around the Pegasus Plus that the training effect felt really good. It didn't feel like I was working substantially harder than I was in the Vaporfly 3, but I did feel like I was getting a very different stimulus in my feet, my calves, and my hips than I would in the carbon fiber plated shoe of the Vaporfly 3. And in a training scenario, that's great to be able to have both of those. The second rep is a 1K at 350 per kilometer or 612 per mile, which is a little bit slower than my current 5K pace. And I did 2 reps of these. So again, this is a type of workout that I would be doing in a marathon build or a half marathon build, probably a little bit more focused on speed. And again, between the 2 reps, there isn't really much difference. In fact, the only real difference that the data is showing here is the heart rate. As you can see, the heart rate in the Peg Plus is a little bit higher. It means I am working a little harder in the Peg Plus. But again, there isn't a huge data difference. And the note I had around these 2 reps was that the Vaporfly 3 felt more propellant, felt more steady. I could feel the plate and I would see my stride length extend a little bit. And we're talking a few centimeters towards the end of that rep. But again, the Peg Plus felt just as fast, just as smooth, and it felt like I was getting a very different training effect. Across the board, it's great to have 2 shoes that will do this type of workout very effectively, but giving very different stimulus. And that's what I want in training. And the third way of explaining how these shoes have so much overlap is really to break down how would you build and use either one of these or both of these shoes in an all Nike rotation for training and racing. So back in 2018, my rotation was really this: the Peg 35, the Streak 7 as a fast shoe, and the Vaporfly 4% Flyknit as my race shoe. Now the Streak was the race shoe before the Vaporfly, but this was the rotation that I used a lot. And a lot of people I was running with at the time, this was a very similar rotation. The Peg was the cushy all-arounder. The Streak was that fast workout shoe, specifically good for shorter reps. We're talking 400s, 800s, 1K repeats, and hill work especially, because there was no plate in that shoe. And the Vaporfly, it's a Vaporfly. It was obviously great for a lot of other things. But this was one of those transitory rotations that, as a Nike runner, we were using back then. Now, another rotation that I would use, and this was around 2019, 2020, was stepping up to the Peg 37. There was a little Peg 36 in here. This is where I started to really depend on the Zoomfly, mostly the Zoomfly Flyknit, and then the Zoomfly 3, especially when the Vaporfly Next% came out. But again, the Pegasus was the cushy all-arounder, the Vaporfly was the race shoe, and this is where I started to depend on a plated shoe as my fast trainer, as my performance trainer, as I would call it now. And the Zoomfly was really my go-to. But the Zoomfly was never that great. Now, in 2021, there was a slight refinement here. This was the Peg 38, the Zoomfly 4, and the Vaporfly Next% 2. And at this point, this is where I started to kind of step away from having a plated shoe as a fast shoe, also because the Zoomfly 4 really wasn't that great. But the Vaporfly Next% 2, particularly with the upper change on the Next% 2, that became a very, very valid training option now. The original Next%, the Vapor Weave upper on that, was a little too harsh for a lot of training, but the Next% 2 was actually great for training. And in 2022, I went back to a non-plated fast shoe. So this was Peg 39 as the daily. Next Percent 2 is my race shoe, and this is where the Streakfly comes in, and this is, again, where I really go back to using a much more flexible and much more natural feeling shoe as my fast shoe for all of those workouts. The Streakfly was an excellent shoe. If you watch this channel, you know I'm a big fan of it. I loved it for track workouts. I loved it for easy running. I loved it for hill reps, especially. It was probably the best hill rep shoe I've ever run in. It was just an excellent shoe, but it wasn't that durable. So if I wanted a shoe in this fast category to do a little bit more easy running in it, and the Streakfly did that really well, I would just wear through it really quickly, and it didn't have the pop that the Next Percent 2 did. So from a race standpoint, it wasn't really ever a valid race option for me, but I dearly loved this shoe. And in 2023, we got the Vaporfly 3 update, which was a huge update that made the shoe, to me, much more versatile for training and racing. And this is really where I also began to see that there's a huge gap in the Nike lineup in that fast category. Yes, the Streakfly still existed, but it wasn't really the shoe that I wanted to be running in anymore, especially after running the Vaporfly 3, because I found a lot of what I liked the Streakfly for, the Peg 40 did, and I much preferred the feel of the Vaporfly 3 for a lot of workouts, but I still was missing a shoe here. I needed something in that fast category, and what I did for quite a bit of last year, and this is what I used as my rotation to build into New York City last fall, was I would rotate 2 pairs of pegs and 2 pairs of Vaporflies. I would have 1 peg and 1 Vaporfly with more miles, usually about 100 to 125 more miles on it, meaning it was a softer, much more broken in shoe. And I would use that for the easier running. So in the peg, that would be my easy sort of recovery shoe, and I'd use the fresher peg for faster running, some workouts, hill reps, that sort of thing. Same thing with the Vaporfly 3. I'd use the more broken in one for long runs, for training runs, and I would only pull out the newer, fresher Vaporfly 3 for key workouts or really fast running. And this worked really well, but again, it wasn't really optimal. And now that we're in 2024, and now that we have the excellent Pegasus 41 as that all-around Pegasus, and I think it's probably one of the best Pegasus that we've had in a long time, and we still have the Vaporfly 3, if I'm looking to build a training rotation, for the first half of 2024, it was glaringly obvious that Nike had a huge gap between these two shoes. They just did not have a fast shoe. Yes, the Streakfly is still around, but as I just outlined, it wasn't really what I wanted to be using. And yes, the Zoomfly 5 exists, but no, it's not a shoe that anyone's training in. It's not a very good shoe, so it's just not something that fits in that category. Plus, as I said, through various rotations over the years, I moved away from really wanting a plated shoe exclusively in that area. So until really July of this year, we had a huge gap for an all Nike rotation, but with the introduction of the Pegasus Plus, that shoe now really fits very nicely between these two shoes. And it works so well because it's a fast shoe, as you saw from the data. It is a great workout shoe, but it's much more durable than the Streakfly was. So it's a shoe that I can do easy running in if I just want an alternative to the Peg 41. And it's a shoe that I can do faster training runs in if I don't want to do those exclusively in a plated shoe like the Vaporfly 3. So this gives me more options, which is really what I want out of a training and racing rotation. I especially like to do that rotation with as few shoes as possible that have maximum overlap so that I don't need to worry about having a ton of shoes. I can do more with less. But now also in 2024, we have this shoe in the race category of the Alphafly 3. And I think the Pegasus Plus still sits really nicely between the Peg 41 and the Alphafly 3. The Alphafly 3 is a very capable shoe, especially if you're training for a marathon. You're going to do a lot of long running in that. You're going to do a lot of your workouts in that. It's an excellent and actually oddly very durable shoe that you can do a lot of training in. And to have something like the Peg Plus that's still Zoom X, it's a much lighter and more nimble shoe as far as how it feels on foot, but it has the stability of the Alphafly 3 because it has a wider contact patch. It's just a great training option to have. So again, Nike has this excellent fast shoe option between the daily Pegasus 41 and the race shoe of the Alphafly 3. But another way to construct this rotation is this. You could put the Vaporfly 3 in that fast category, and now you have a really versatile fast shoe, another race shoe between the daily shoe of the Peg 41 and the race shoe, the marathon race shoe of the Alphafly 3. This gives you a lot more coverage. It gives you a much more nimble super shoe that has a lot more acceleration in it over the Vaporfly 3, and it just gives you more options. This is really where I see the Vaporfly 3 and the Pegasus Plus really have a lot of overlap. And honestly, if you wanted to build a rotation with these 4 shoes, where you have those 2 shoes in the middle, the Peg Plus and the Vaporfly 3, just giving yourself more options, you really have all bases covered now. So again, this is really the primary place where I see there being a lot of overlap between the Peg Plus and the Vaporfly 3. And also, we probably have this rotation. So those racing the marathon and the Alphafly 3 may prefer the Vomero 17 as their daily trainer. They may want more material underfoot, and the Vomero 17 is your option for that. So if you like more material underfoot, the Vomero 17 works very well as your daily shoe, and the propulsiveness of the Alphafly 3 works really well as a race shoe. But this is where I really think the Peg Plus really comes into its own between these 2 shoes, because again, you're getting the stability and the width of the Alphafly 3, but you're getting a shoe that's a little bit more get up and go, a little bit more agile, a little bit more nimble than the cruiser of the Vomero 17. So now between these 3 shoes, you really have everything covered for marathon training specifically. I hope that helps explain why I do think these 2 shoes cover a lot of the same bases, especially in a training scenario. Now for racing, you're obviously always going to pick this over this. I cannot think of a time where I'd pick the Peg Plus to race in, really anything, especially over the Vaporfly 3. It's always going to be this shoe. But in a training scenario where you need shoes that cover a lot of different bases, having the option of a carbon-plated version and a non-carbon plated version to cover a lot of the same workouts is great, because this is going to be a very different training stimulus than this, and it's going to work different muscles. And in a training context, that's really what you want. So again, these are both excellent shoes, and they're both shoes that oddly will cover a lot of the same bases for you in a training scenario. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you find this content useful, consider subscribing. You'll see more content from me pop up in your feed. If you already are a subscriber, I've enabled memberships on this channel. Click the join button below the video title, or if you're on an iOS device in the YouTube app, click the link in the video description to find out more. If neither one of those options are great, leave a comment, like this video, because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.